Today we're going to be talking about communication. So, communication is one of the most important things that we as humans engage in. And it's so important to have clear, effective, respectful communication when you're in a romantic relationship. So, if you were here listening to me, you could have been in a relationship, you could have had several relationships, you could have been in a marriage, could have broken up, and you know that over time, when there isn't the proper connection, that communication starts to break down. All of a sudden, you're not feeling heard. All of a sudden, they're just ignoring you. And vice versa. You might not hear a request that's given by your spouse or your partner. And over time, as the emotion around being dismissed, kind of kind of what happens there. Over time, when you're feeling more and more dismissed, the communication just breaks down further and further until possibly there's no more communication. So it's interesting to me because when we are growing up and going to school and learning how to be in the world, the professional world, that is, we are taught how to express ourselves to a certain degree, of course. We're taught how to, ask for a raise, how to conduct yourself in an interview, how to maybe present at a meeting. However, the communication somehow diminishes, or the rules of communication somehow get lost when we get into romantic relationships and when we are in partnerships. So, today I really want to talk about some tips, really. It's about effective tips around communicating. I want to express the need to have these types of tips and these types of exercises in your life for your professional life and mostly for your personal life, because without realizing how you express yourself, then you are going to continue to experience not having your needs met. So I want to teach you how to get your needs met. I want to teach you how to be heard, how to feel confident, and how to feel respected in those requests. So I want to start off by telling you a story around my experience with communication. So I grew up in a household where yelling and screaming was a commonplace occurrence. So we expressed ourselves from the emotional side all the time. That's kind of what I was taught. And then I never felt in that context that I couldn't voice. Well, that's not true completely. Um, the way that we expressed ourselves was not the right way to be heard, clearly. Um, but as time went on, I didn't ever really feel like I wasn't allowed to speak. No one ever really shut me down, as I grew up. And I only started to feel it when I started to go to work and started to be in a profession where it was male dominated. And also, I started to feel it in my marriage. I never felt it before, but in my marriage, I started to feel it. And I started to understand what it meant to sort of shut down your own voice because you're afraid of reprimand, someone not loving you. All those emotions came up. But I just want to tell you a story around the work environment because it's really interesting, because I found it fascinating, because I'd always been in the communication industry, marketing, communication, expressing yourself, selling things, making sure your message is clear. And in the realm of advertising, never felt like I was less than, never felt that I couldn't voice and I couldn't express myself because I was female, because I worked with a lot of females back then. But then I went client side and went into development, which is male dominated. And the only females you saw were assistants or secretaries. And I was in the marketing department. I I started to recognize that my voice wasn't being heard, although I did conduct major meetings at that time. And then when I got back into advertising, sort of around the time my marriage broke up, I was doing a client presentation with a colleague, all men. Imagine this boardroom, all high profile, very wealthy developer men. I was doing the Vanna White thing, and I was instructed not to speak, actually, by my colleagues. And everything was fine. I was okay with that. You know, males need to hear males. But then at the end of the presentation, we all sat down in the boardroom to discuss, next steps. And the client decided, for some unknown reason, to do some sort of male bonding or something. But clearly, because of my single female presence amongst like 10 men, made a comment around having what a pleasure it was to hear the presentation coming from a male voice rather than a high-pitched, squeaky, whiny female voice. And I was shocked. I was shocked. Didn't say a word. Sat there. They all kind of laughed uncomfortably. A few of my colleagues looked over at me, knowing that I might say something. And yeah, I was just astonished. It was really fascinating to see how that type of attitude permeated amongst men. And then years later, of course, I also started reading an article about, it was in the Harvard Business Review, around what is the difference between women in the workplace and men in the workplace. And they dedicated a whole issue to why women aren't, breaking the glass ceiling. Why aren't they getting the CEO jobs? Why aren't they, making as much money? And I remember reading an article and they had interviewed some prominent male CEOs, and one was the CEO of Cisco International. So it wasn't Canada, international. And he told the story of his mother who wanted to be a doctor, but she was told that she couldn't. Her brothers and sisters went to university and became professionals, but just because she was a female, she was told she couldn't. And this CEO was really impacted by that story because he loved his mother, respected his mother. She clearly contributed a lot to his life. So he made it a point of pushing women up through his business, through his corporation. And one time he was in a meeting and they were discussing an issue. It was a board meeting, and there was like mostly men, but equal amount of women. Actually, I think it was equal. And a woman presented a particular scenario or a situation or a resolution to some sort of issue, and then a male colleague essentially said the exact same thing. The president, so this guy who was in the article, recognized the male's version and congratulated him and held him up, and completely ignored the females. So she addressed it with him after the meeting, and he was shocked. He was shocked that he didn't hear her in the same way that he heard him. This impacted everything in my life from that point on. So I started doing courses on public speaking and, just tried to get my voice at a point where I felt confident that I was expressing myself. And part of that journey and part of that work was understanding how our communication starts. So when you're in a relationship, now this applies to relationships actually. It applies to relationships. So I want you to think of only in your personal relationship situation, not in business, because you're in a different emotional state, clearly. When we're in romantic relationships, marriages, whatever, we speak through emotion more than we speak through our rational brain. So when our information first goes to our amygdala part of our brain, so that's our primitive brain. So we see what's going on outside and we make conclusions, and then we process it, and then we speak what we need to speak, right? Whatever it is, what needs to happen. So when the information goes into our amygdala, The amygdala is the part of our primitive brain that holds all the emotional memories, right? It's the heavy stuff. That's where our brain says, okay, this information, is it related to something that happened in the past? Am I triggered by it because now I have a story that relates to how this feels? Or is this something that I can just, in my rational brain say it's fine, and now I'm going to take rational steps to express myself? What often happens is when we are in a romantic relationship, and remember, everything is emotional, we express ourselves from the emotion of the amygdala. And when we are in conflict or in some sort of discord with our partner, then we are stuck there. We immediately react from the emotional side, okay? And we don't allow the information to travel to our rational brain. It takes 3 to 5 seconds from the information to go in to go to our prefrontal cortex to make the decision. Should I run away? Should I assess the situation? Should I put on my coat and grab my bag and leave? Should I sit here and think of ways to discuss this, right? So your job then is to train yourself to do certain things if you are always speaking from the emotional side, okay? So the first thing you need to do is get grounded, all right? If you know you're going to have a heavy conversation, or you're going to make a request and you're kind of anticipating, a negative reaction, then I want you to get grounded, okay? Knowing this might happen, feel yourself connected to the earth and do whatever you need to do to get grounded. I've given lots of tips before. I'm not going to repeat them. And breathe. Okay, breathing will calm you down. Breathing through your nose activates your brain. Then I want you to realize that how you deliver has so much more importance than anything else. Even sometimes in certain situations, the context of what you're saying isn't as important as the tone of which you are saying it in, okay? So what I mean by that is we tend to deliver words in monotone kind of speak. The majority of people speak in monotone kind of speaking, right? We think by being calm that we should just keep it in a monotone way. But all that does is sort of make people disconnect from what you're saying because they're not going to pay attention. So expert voice coaches and even acting coaches promote essentially speaking as if you are singing a song. Okay, so you want to have variety in the tonality in your speaking. So going up, going down, making it sound more from the point of view of excitement rather than I don't feel that you're listening to me, right? It's more like, I really don't feel like you're listening to me. See the difference? So try to speak in a tonal variation kind of way. Another thing that we've been taught as women forever has been to be quiet. Be a good girl, sit in the corner, be quiet. I mean, I felt that through, like I said, in my professional life. Not always, but definitely in my marriage. Very interesting. I know that, the younger generation, millennials, don't feel that they've been shut down, but we are still trained through media, through movies, through everything that we read, that women are supposed to be more demure, they're not supposed to yell, they're not supposed to have a loud, booming voice like a man does. But I want you to throw that rule out of the window, okay? That does not apply anymore in today's world. And if you want to communicate so that your needs are met and so your desires will be heard, I want you to speak in a clear, loud voice. You don't have to yell. If you're coming from that emotional place and you raise your volume, then you're yelling and you're screeching and you're whining. And we don't want to be doing that anymore, right? Don't whisper. I've had some friends whisper, like just quietly speaking, this type of, okay, well, that's fine. And that has a place, but I want you to know that there are options that you need to pick and choose when you're having conversations. Okay? So, of course, sexy bedroom voice is where it needs to be. And if you're speaking to little children, of course, it's quiet. But when you're speaking to a partner and you're speaking to somebody, even at the store or on the phone, speak in a volume that is loud and clear. Okay? Don't shut yourself down. And then the final tip that I want to tell you about is when we're speaking, we've been taught to go down when we have a comma, when we have a period. So when our tone descends, it can sound like you're sad. It can sound like you may be depressed. It can sound like a lower vibration. And when you want to express yourself, you have to have an ascending ending. So here's an example. Honey, can you take out the garbage? As opposed to, honey, can you take out the garbage? That was a little low at the end, but you know what I mean, right? So you're more excited in the way you speak, and your tone is going up instead of going down. That is the most important thing. When you are speaking, if you're speaking for a long period of time, if you have to really express yourself, don't forget to breathe through your nose, okay? Because when we breathe through our nose, it actually activates our brain, and it's really important. So when you embrace these practices and understand that in order to be heard, you really do have to create more activity in your voice, create more command in your voice, create more energy and energetic ending in your voice, but always coming from the point of view of being grounded. Grounding is key at the very beginning whenever you need to speak. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to be rambling on. And this is what I used to call this verbal diarrhea. We do not need to express ourselves constantly to keep our attention and blah, 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 and just say useless things and on and on and on and on. That comes from an emotional insecurity. And it feels that way, and that's how you deliver it. And then you're going to create a dynamic that is from that point of view. So when you're talking to anybody, especially if you're starting to date, get grounded, be intentional in what you say, be up in the way you speak, and if you really want them to hear you, create a song out of your voice. And if that doesn't make sense to you, like I don't want you to like flit around like a songbird. However, you really do need to maintain anything but monotone sort of voice, okay? Up and down, feel excited, but not overly excited. You know what I'm talking about. So the most important thing that I want you to realize is that no matter where you are in your journey to find the love of your life, you have to repair your voice. Because after being shut down in your marriage and having communication breakdown, there is a tendency for women to shut down their voice completely. And, the inner critic takes over. And we decide that we're not worthy and that our requests aren't ever going to be heard, so why bother? Or we shut down our voice when something is wrong, we've been told not to complain, and that story. You should be happy that you even have a partner, or that you even have, all those stories are bullshit. And if you need to express yourself, I want you to give yourself permission to do it. If you're constantly shutting down your voice, you're going to damage your thyroid. Prior to me doing this work, I was existing as a holistic nutritional consultant, and many of the women who came to me were suffering from thyroid issues, Hashimoto's, Graves, and it was almost like an epidemic. Almost 100% of the women had thyroid issues. And I was astonished. I did a lot of research around that at that time, and it was on the rise. Thyroid issues were on the rise. And I have to tell you, ladies, the reason why we have thyroid issues is because we are not speaking up. So ignore what everyone says. Ignore your family members who are shutting you down. Just speak your truth. But speak your truth in a way that will be heard. Remember, tonality is important. Coming from a grounded, not an emotional, amygdala, wounded point of view. Coming from your wounded voice, you will always come up against a brick wall. Okay? So, I hope these tips were useful and that you can use them today. I'd love to hear if you use some of these tips today, how it went with any conversation. So please share on the group. As well, I want to remind you that we have another 100% free masterclass coming up next Monday already. And this is all about healing your heart and reclaiming your love life. So please get on and let's start moving forward in our lives. Thanks for being with me today. Until next time.